TipTut. Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut and welcome to another Adobe Animate CC Intro 2 series. Now my first one got mixed reviews, some loved it, some hated it, some had legitimate criticism. Others had not so legitimate criticisms. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to just do the whole thing again and do a bit of a more universal animation. We're going to be building this little guy, little angry monster eating some goo. It's going to cover all of the principles of how to get started in Adobe Animate. I'm not going to be going through like the 12 principles of animation because that's a whole other thing and I'm not really qualified to teach that. But I will be showing you how to get to grips with the system and make this little cool guy. So, welcome. Let's get to it. Adobe Animate, for those who don't know, is used for all sorts of different things. Things like frame-by-frame animation, web animations, web adverts, flash games, loads of stuff. It used to be called Adobe Flash. Before that, it was Macromedia Flash. It's now been rebranded because of all the fuss that now comes along with Flash these days. It uses vector-based objects much like Illustrator does, rather than raster, like Photoshop or After Effects, although After Effects and Photoshop both use both nowadays, but that's not the point. Vector shapes are made from mathematical equations rather than pixels. This means every shape you draw can be scaled without losing quality. For example, if I draw this little circle here, like so, you can see that if I were to scale this up, it's not going to lose any quality around the edge. It is a purely vector-based software. Adobe Animate uses timeline-based animation. Now, we'll go through what the timeline is, but for now, it's just this box up here. And there's 3 types of frames you need to use in order to create animation. As you move along the timeline, you can draw different shapes, different objects, and they will play in order in the FPS that you've specified, usually 24 frames per second, and give the illusion of animation, okay? Now, keyframes, which are these gray boxes with a black dot in them, these indicate the content has changed at this point in time. So you can see at the moment, every frame that we've had so far, I've drawn something new and it is a new keyframe, okay? The shortcut for creating those is F6, but of course you can always right click and just use insert keyframe here. Frames, they repeat the content of the last keyframe and they look like a grey box with a black box in them. You can see that if I move between these 2 frames here, and I'm just using the comma and full stop buttons to do that. If I move between the 2 frames here, there's no difference because this is a standard frame and it's repeating whatever the last keyframe had. And then there's blank keyframes, and these are empty keyframes with no content. For example, this last frame here and this frame here, there's no content on those. Nice and simple, easy to understand. Those are the 3 types of frames that you'll be using to create all animation inside of Adobe Animate. So there are 2 types of animation that you can create. There's frame by frame, which is traditional. You know, you draw a picture, you move it a little bit, you draw a picture, you draw a picture, you draw a picture until it gives the illusion of movement. That's known as frame by frame because you're drawing each new picture in a frame by frame sequence. And then there is tweening, where we provide the computer with a start and an end point, and then the computer generates the frames in between. So say, for example, we wanted to do a ball bouncing. Frame by frame animation might look something like this. Each time we draw a new ball, like so, until he squishes on the floor and then bounces back up. And as that ball carries on, we'd be drawing each one of those frames. In tweening animation, we'd perhaps draw the ball here. We'd move on a frame and draw a ball here. And then we'd tell the computer to do its best to think about what would go in between those 2 frames. Okay, that's all there really is to it, and that will make complete sense once we actually start our animation. So without any further ado, let's do just that. Okay, so let's figure out how to animate this little monster guy. So I'm just going to pull down on my time frame window here, my timeline, and just show you all of the different layers that I've got going on to create this dude. And this is something that you need to understand as a concept before you even open Animate, before you even start messing around with the toolbar, start trying to work with layers, work with frames, find out the properties of your canvas. The first thing you need to understand is that animation is very complicated and can and should be split up into as many different bits as possible. You can see that I've got all sorts of different layers here, a layer for just the body, a layer for the hair, a layer for the left horn, a layer for the right horn, a layer for the eyebrows, a layer for each eye. Each one of these layers has only one object on it because animating all of this, if they were all sort of one main item, would take forever and a lot of effort. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to jump right in to actually creating from the very ground up. Now, the first thing you're going to need to do is create a new document. Okay, yours is probably going to look like this when you first open up Animate CC. Your timeline may be down at the bottom, your properties may be in a different place. I've set this up to mimic more of the older Macromedia Flash layout. If you don't have any windows that I'm talking about throughout this entire series, you can just click on window at the top and open them up from the list here. Okay, so let's create a new document. It doesn't really matter what we do it in at the moment. So I'm going to do it in HTML5 Canvas, which is the latest sort of newest thing. You don't really want to be using ActionScript unless there's a proper reason for it, because Flash has been basically left alone now. Nobody uses it anymore. Let's talk about the interface a little bit then. Down the left-hand side, or perhaps down the right, you'll have your toolbar, and this is where you can find all the different shapes and things that you need to create your artwork on your stage, whether that's going to be circles, rectangles, squares, brushes, anything that you need. It's all on this toolbar here. Along the top, or perhaps along the bottom for you, you're going to have your timeline. This runs from left to right, and as the playhead here moves across, it plays your animation. And then along the right hand side, you're going to have all of your different properties, and you may have something that looks like this as well with your align information and your color information. Okay, cool. Let's jump right in. The first thing we're going to need to do is actually bring in the sketch I've already made of our little monster. So I'm just going to go over to my folder and I'm going to grab that monster for us now. Here he is. And as you can see, he is very large. So I'm just going to hit Control- to zoom out. And you can see, here's our guy. He's looking pretty crunchy and pretty angry. I decided to go with this one in the end because it looks a bit easier and it's quite more simple to animate for you guys just starting out. Okay. Now you can see where our canvas is by this white box, and anything in this dark background, that's not going to show in our animation at all. You can see the size of your canvas by just clicking anywhere where there's nothing, and your properties window will then adapt to see that you're trying to click the canvas. This is where you set things like your frames per second and your size and things like that. You can also give it a default background color of your stage if you wanted to as well. Okay, what I'm going to do is click on my image and I'm going to move over here to the free transform tool, or you can just hit Q on your keyboard, and I'm going to shrink this down by clicking and dragging on these little handles. If I hold shift, it does that in a uniform size. And I'm just going to bring this over just until our little monster guy is sitting comfortably on our stage. Now we're really zoomed out, so I can just go up to, again, hit Control+ or minus, or I can go up to this little box here and choose show frame or fit in window, and that will zoom in to a point where I'm happy. Okay. What I'm going to do now is just position this guy on the stage where I want him and put him on his own layer. If I double click this layer here, I can rename him image, and I can click this lock icon so that I don't accidentally start selecting this as I'm trying to create my actual artwork. So there's three icons here. There's a new layer, new folder, and delete. What we're going to do, like we did in our previous version, which I will just open up for reference now, we're going to create a lot of different layers for each section of our monster here. Now, what I'm going to do is up on my website, tiptut.xyz, you'll be able to get this sort of GIF of this little guy doing his thing. So you can lift the colors from that if you want to, or you can follow along here. I've already got them made in this little palette. So what I'm going to do is just copy and paste those over. But all this palette is, just so that you know, is just a selection of squares that I've made from the tool palette here. So I've just created a new layer and I'm going to call this one palette. and I'm going to paste it. And I'm just going to put it somewhere off screen so that it doesn't interfere with anything on my stage. To create that, I literally just drew like this, okay? Selected the shape that I wanted, and then just chose the color from the palette here. Now we'll get into different things like shapes, objects, motion graphics, all that sort of thing as we go. But I find it's best to learn how to do it as you're creating something rather than me just spouting out a bunch of jargon at you, okay? So for now, let's leave that how it is. The first thing we're going to need to do is create our monster's body shape and get that animated and get that looking pretty good. Try to follow along. It may feel a bit overwhelming at first, but I promise you by the end of the project, you'll realize how all these different parts fit together. It's just a lot of information to absorb at once, so I'm trying to do it in a way that makes the most sense to me. Let's create a new layer, and we'll double click on this and call it body. You'll notice that as you create a layer, it automatically creates a keyframe for you. And in this case, in the case of the body, it is blank for obvious reasons. Now, there's several ways we could create this body here. If we had a Wacom tablet, which we do, but I'm not using for this tutorial, just so that everyone I know can follow along, we could choose our brush tool. We could go to our eyedropper to make sure we're on the right pink, and we could literally just draw around this guy's body, okay? Like so. If that's something you want to do, go right ahead. You can choose your paint bucket tool and fill that in so you've got a solid body, and this creates a solid shape. Now, it's important to know that if I were to draw another shape over the top of this that was the same color, all of those shapes would then merge together and become one object. If you don't want that to happen, if you want to continue to draw shapes which are separate from each other, that's easy to do. You just have to make sure that when you have your tool selected, you go over to your properties panel here and you just choose object drawing mode is on. If I do that, when I draw an object and then draw another object over top, it will act more like Illustrator brushes and you'll be able to select those individually. If you draw with drawing shape mode off, however, it will merge those shapes. Oh dear, I didn't mean to draw that. It will merge those shapes into one as soon as you release the mouse. Let's delete that quickly. That was a bad shape. Okay. I'm going to create this guy's body with the pen tool, however. So I'm going to click the pen tool up here, and this works in very much the same way as Illustrator, in that you can click certain points on your page and it will draw you a line between them. If you click and drag on a certain point, you can create a curve, okay? Nice and simple. What I'm going to do is remove all of this, go to my pen tool and start drawing. So when I have my pen tool selected, it doesn't use the colors from down here, it uses the colors from your properties panel. Now, I could draw with either object mode on or off. It's totally up to you. I'm going to try off and see if it works. If it does, great. If it doesn't, then we can try again by drawing it with on. Okay, so I'm just going to roughly follow the shape of this monster, but I'm going to smooth him out a little bit because obviously my last one was a sketch and this is going to be my final piece. So I want to make sure his shape is nice and smooth. So I'm just clicking and dragging to create this little monster shape. And I created that harsh corner there by when I click and drag, I can just hold Alt and that allows me to control one corner, which obviously means that I can create a hard corner like so. So I've created the outline of my shape here. Object drawing mode was off. So if I were to fill this shape with my paint bucket and deselect it, I'd be left with one entire shape. Now this one, when I filled it, this is acting as a fill. And because I drew this with the pen tool, this outline that I drew is acting as a stroke. So if I have a stroke on this outside and a fill but no stroke on this inside, they can still actually act independently of each other, which is quite good. We don't actually need a stroke, in this case, so I can just remove that. But what I'm probably going to do is actually leave them in because that may help with the shape tweening that we do in a minute. So as long as you've got something that looks like that, or even at this point, something that looks like this, then you're totally fine, okay? I'm actually going to leave the fill off for a moment so I can still see the work that I'm drawing underneath, okay? Now, here comes the animating part. We're going to make this loop like this does here. So you can see at the moment, if I turn this loop on, and don't worry, we'll talk about this. If I turn this loop on, my little guy goes back and forth over and over forever. And all that means is our first frame has to be exactly the same as our last frame. Doesn't really matter what happens in between, as long as that is true, okay? So I'm going to go back to my other document here, and I'm going to move 1 second into the future. Now you can do that just by clicking anywhere on the timeline. You can see that you've got these handy 1 second, 2 seconds here. But if you understand your document well, you'll know that 24 frames is 1 second. So here, I'm going to place a new keyframe, and I'm going to do that by hitting F6. Okay. Whoa, looks like everything's gone wrong, but it hasn't, don't worry. You'll notice the only frame here that has content past the first frame is this body that we've made. So these two layers here don't have any content past the first frame. So if we were to hit play, which is enter, it would just disappear, okay? That's fine, because what we can do is we can just select these two parts here and just hit F5, and that adds a bunch of frames in up to the point where our playhead is. Now, if you remember from before, a frame repeats the previous keyframe without making any changes. So now we've got our final frame, which looks the same, and we can still see all of our guidelines and have our palette underneath. The next step then is to choose this guy's furthest point. Now, because we're looping, we probably want to go halfway through so that it's perfectly even, and then draw the bit where he's leaning back, okay? So I'm going to do that by hitting F7 for a new blank keyframe, and I can just draw my new shape. But you can see at the moment, it's going to be a bit hard to make a smooth action if I can't see what my previous shape looked like. So for that, I'm going to turn on the onion skin tool. And you'll see that now I get a little bit of a ghostly outline of what my previous drawing was. Now, nothing is on this frame. It's still empty. It's just showing you in between these brackets. So it's showing me 2 frames before and 2 frames after. If I were to draw a bunch of stuff on this frame and then move back, you'd see that I could see the shapes, the shadows of what's happening on the next frame. This just helps you with your drawing, okay? So what I'm going to do is grab my pen tool, and I'm going to start drawing my new shape. So let's have him leaning back like this, nice and strong. Let's have him grow taller. It's important to keep the mass of your character the same, so it doesn't look like he's like blobbing and stretching more content than he actually has, unless that's of course the desired effect that you want to go for. In this case it isn't, however, so I'm just going to start tweaking here. Now all I've done here is select the direct sub-selection tool, and I'm just going through, and I can just use these handles to adjust the shape of my character, and I can even use the arrow keys as well if I wanted to, okay? So I'm making him a little bit taller, maybe a little bit shorter actually. Let's make him a little bit fatter, like so. And then if I use the free transform tool, I can start to squish him entirely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this white dot and move it down to the bottom. And what that does is that means this is the anchor point of that shape. And I'm just going to squish him a little bit and then maybe stretch him out a little bit like so. Okay. Now that looks pretty good to me. Maybe I'm just going to rotate him a little bit more. If I just make sure I've got everything selected. That looks all right. And now if I move back and forth between my frames, I can see what's happening with my character. And I'm just doing this again with comma and full stop, or greater than, less than symbols. Okay, okie dokie, happy with that. Now, we're going to look at shape tweens. Now, we've talked about frame by frame. We talked about tweening animation. The first type of animation with tweening that you can do is a shape tween. And a shape tween only works when you've got these little dots over. It doesn't work when you create symbols or something, which we're going to talk about later on, which is why we're doing this one first. Now, I've given it my start point and I've given it my end point. So I'm going to choose anywhere in between those two endpoints, and I'm going to right click and choose create shape tween. And that will give us a green shape tween like so. Now, that probably isn't what we were looking for. We don't want that weird thing happening at the bottom. However, at the top, pretty accurate. I'm pretty happy with that, okay? Now, if you did this frame by frame animation, obviously you just draw exactly what you want. However, with shape tweens, sometimes you have to give the computer a bit of a hint as to what you want to use it for, how you want it to look, really. It's trying to ascertain based on what points I've drawn, where it should be moving certain segments. Now, you can do things called shape hints to fix that. For example, we can put shape hints on these corners to say, no, these corners should stay the same. And that's very easy to do. You can just go up to modify, shape, add shape hint. And that gives us a nice little red A here. Now I'm going to go up to do that again, shape hint, and that gives us a nice B. And all I can do is I can click and drag these around, and I can put them where I think the issue is occurring. For example, I can drag the A down to this corner here and the B down to this corner here. Now, if I were to go through my animation and go to the last keyframe, you'll notice that the A and the B come back, okay? And if I click and drag these to the same position, they should stay green. And you can see already that that corner has changed. If I undo that, you can see that this corner is causing issues at the moment. And if you look at the onion skin when I release, it's fixed that corner and it realizes that's to stay in the same place. If I do this with the B, same sort of thing, okay? Now, when I play this, it stops having the corner issues down the bottom there. So you can see that growing and releasing. Perfect, happy with that shape. Okay, so the next thing then is to just do the same thing here, create shape tween, and perhaps add those shape hints again. See, as it's going back, it's going to cause some issues. So we're going to go to modify shape, add shape hint, move that into space down here, go back to our last frame, move that into space, and we should see that correct itself. Let's do the same thing with the second one. Add shape hint B on the start keyframe, and then move shape hint B on the last keyframe. And then that is it. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Pretty happy with that. Okay, however, the movement looks a little bit clunky. It kind of just goes up and then back down. There's no easing. If you look at this other one here, when we hit play, he's kind of moving with a bit more oomph, a bit more physics attached to him. Now that's very simple to do. If you select any frame with your tweening animation on it, you can get this tweening properties panel up here. Now the classic ease, if you choose to edit this at the moment, just goes and shows an easing graph. Straight line from bottom left to top right, no easing in, no easing out. You can adjust these handles to make it a little bit more interesting. If I hit play now, you can see that first one goes to slow to fast to slow again. Okay, now we probably want that to be something like this. And to make our life a little bit easier, if we actually hit cancel, what we can do is select these frames and loop them by clicking this loop option here. And we can just bring that over to the first half of our animation. When we hit play, that means it's just going to loop over this section here. Now, when we select to edit the ease and we hit play, it's just going to loop that one section, and we can go and edit with a bit more control. So let's do something like this. Goes a bit fast like that. So maybe let's go from something like this. Okay, let's extend that out and see what that looks like. Okay, didn't save that, but that's okay. We can just go and choose one of these presets. If we don't want to create a custom one, so we could try ease in, ease out. Yeah, I like that one. Quad, I think that one was called. No, sorry, cubic. So I could just select ease in, ease out and click cubic here. Double selecting that will apply it to your ease. So we can do that to the same thing on the second ease here as well. We can go to ease in, ease out, cubic, double click. And when we loop this, there you go, he's rocking out. Looks a little bit more realistic and cool. So let's go back to our first keyframe here. We can leave the loop on for now and go to our bucket tool and fill this guy in. So this keyframe can be filled in and this keyframe can be filled in. And now we have our little monster body rocking out. Wow, that is a lot going on. I think that'll do for the first episode. I'm going to upload the second one fairly soon as well. So hopefully you guys can sort of follow along a bit quicker. But what we will be doing in the next few episodes is more of the same here. So if you want to jump ahead in time, then feel free to do so. If you want to follow along, then feel free to wait. But thank you for joining me on this first episode. We've done a lot of setting up, a lot of understanding, different things like that. And hopefully I'll see you all for episode 2 when we'll get into the nitty-gritty of animating our little dude. Thanks very much, everybody, and I'll see you next time.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.